I'm going to show you how to prep a piece of paper for painting with acrylics. So here I have a piece of foam core. So it's just a piece of black foam core. It's a thin piece, but it's rigid enough that it's going to keep my paper from buckling. And then this is a piece of Canson watercolor paper, 140 pound. And I want to tape it to this rigid surface so that when I'm working on it with acrylics, it doesn't begin to buckle or wrinkle. So I'm going to use some white artist tape for that. And I'm just going to tape it down all the way around and leave maybe a 1/4 inch border. So that way when I remove the tape after the painting is finished, I'll have a nice little border. And I'm just eyeballing the length. Now I need to tape it all the way around because that's what's going to keep it from wrinkling. If I just put a little piece of tape on each side, that's not going to do the trick. It needs to be taped down so that as it dries, it pulls back taut. All right, now I need to burnish the edges to make sure that my gesso doesn't go back under the edge here. So I'm going to use a bone folder. This is a tool that's often used in bookmaking. You can see it's just a piece of bone or resin that can be used for folding or burnishing like this. So I'm just pulling it along the edges of the tape to make sure that the tape is pressed down really well. You could also do the same thing with a fingernail, or you could take a pencil and run that against the edge of the paper. Credit card, something like that. All right, now I'm going to prep it for use with acrylic. Now, if I were using watercolor, of course, I wouldn't want to prep it other than to possibly wet it. But for acrylic, I need to put down some kind of ground. So that could be acrylic paint, but in this case, I'm going to use gesso. So gesso is a surface preparation material that is used for painting. And it is an acrylic gesso, so it contains the same elements as your paint. Acrylic polymer emulsion, titanium white pigment, but also calcium carbonate, which is giving it the chalky finish. So when you buy a canvas at the store, the gesso is what it has been primed with. So that's what I'm going to use to prime my paper. I'm just going to squeeze a little bit of gesso out on my palette here. This is the Liquitex Professional Gesso, and you can see that it is pretty fluid. You can also buy gesso in a gallon bucket, and usually the consistency is a little thicker when you buy it that way. All right, I'm going to dip my my brush in some water. Pick up a little bit of this gesso. All right. It's just a nice thin layer. And I want to put 2 layers of gesso on the paper. So I'll dry the first. Squeeze a little more gesso out on my palette. And put on that second layer. And I'm just using a soft synthetic bristle brush for this, a wide brush. A big brush is just helping me cover more ground more quickly. Now I'm going for a pretty smooth finish here, but if I wanted more texture in the gesso, I could use a thicker gesso and allow some of those brush marks to show, but here I'm trying to kind of feather them out a little bit. All right, there you go. So now I have my watercolor paper prepped, and once this is dry, I can paint with acrylic or even oil directly on this.